Hello, my name's Ben Derbyshire. I'm a past president of the RIBA. Thank you very much indeed, Carolinda, for wheeling us out from time to time. It's very enjoyable to be here, and thanks to the awards team and TAU, as I am now told to call them, not the Architects Underground, old brand. To Building Stories number 2, in person, and my goodness, we are in person, aren't we? It's great to see everybody here, packed into this room, and wonderful terrace and a little bit of air and light and breeze. Anyway, the principle here is celebrating award-winning buildings, sharing the challenges and the triumphs, and on this occasion, of course, as you all know, it's the lovely, beautiful Tintagel Footbridge, commissioned by English Heritage. Nichola Tasker is here to describe the commissioning process. I hope warts and all, Nichola. And the architect, William Matthews, will talk after Nichola. There'll be a little Q&A in between. And I'm not going to let the moment pass without mentioning the engineer. Behind every great building, as we all know, is an engineer. And in this case, Laurent Ney of Ney Partners. It was, of course, shortlisted for the Stirling, which is why it's here. I was rooting for it as the Stirling winner. It didn't win, as you all know. While I was president, I thought I slightly broke the mould in awarding the Stirling Prize on my first jury to an infrastructure project in the form of Hastings Pier. I got a letter from Lady Stirling along the lines of, "What on earth do you think you're doing, you fool?" So the following year, of course, we gave it to Foster's Bloomberg, and she wrote me a very nice letter about that. So it's really nice to have, I suppose you'd call it infrastructure, a piece of beautifully designed infrastructure celebrated in this way. So that's enough from me. Over to you, Nichola, to describe the commissioning process. We look forward to it. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to the RIBA for inviting me here, but thank you to William for asking me to be part of this evening. My name's Nichola Tasker. I work for English Heritage. I am presently English Heritage Director for Stonehenge and West, so that means that I look after the Stonehenge properties and all of English Heritage for 130-odd sites down the west coast of the country, and that includes Tintagel, which is what we're here to talk about. So with regard to this project, I effectively took the role of client in terms of liaising with our architects and working on the design competition, which William and Laurent Ney won. So just as a reminder, English Heritage is a charity now. We look after 420 sites that make up the National Collection of Monuments and Landscapes across England. So we are not Historic England, just in case people still make that mistake. Historic England are the ones who will comment on your planning application or your listed building consent. We are the ones that look after the sites now. So that's just to avoid any fights later on if you've got an issue. It's not one to take up with me. So this is Tintagel Castle, set up on the cliffside on the north-west coast of Cornwall. William's going to talk more about the location and how it drove the design. But really, just to say, you can see that the castle, I hope, is spread across 2 areas. So there's one on what we talk about as the mainland, which is over here, and then another half of the castle sitting on what we describe as the island. Well, you can see immediately it's not quite an island. There is a little link between the 2 land masses, but that is eroding away bit by bit. And if it follows the local erosion patterns, that it will become an island in due course in the next 100 or 200 years. So the proposition for English Heritage is we have this fantastic scheduled monument and Grade 1 listed property, and it's split in the middle. And so for any of our visitors, there is a really challenging journey to enter the site from the mainland side over here and then traverse the cliffside, down one side of the cliffs and up the next. So here is one of our beautiful artist impressions of what the castle would have looked like in the 13th century when it was first built. And this shows you that the gap that you could see on the previous photograph used to be filled in with a landmass. And so the castle used to kind of straddle that gap, and there was more of it. And over time, over the centuries, that has eroded away. So I chose that one because it really starts to show you, if you want to see both sides of the castle, and of course, as English Heritage, we do want you to experience both sides of that castle, you have to traverse from up there, down dozens and dozens of steep cliffside steps, across the low bridge at the bottom, and then up dozens of steps to the other side. This was the situation that we had before we commissioned the bridge that we're here to talk about tonight. And to bring that to life, those steps were really quite a proposition. This is looking, the one on the left-hand side is looking at back up to the mainland. Am I right? Yes, back up to the mainland. So you'd have to come all the way down all of those with your family and your granny and your buggy and whoever else you might have brought with you. And that's what the view looks like, the proposition in front of you as you start on the mainland and look across towards the island. So a consequence for this, which we really had to think about seriously in this heritage, was that lots of people were considerably put off, as you might imagine. You have to be pretty physically fit and able-bodied to encounter these stairs and experience the whole of the site. And it was our responsibility to give access to the site and to help people to engage and understand the site, and this was a major physical barrier. And it was also difficult for our operation of the site because effectively those stairs were just one way. And so you would have to queue. Sometimes we had queues of up to 45 minutes, either to get onto the island or to get off the other side. And you would see, if you look at the rather glum-looking child over on the right, that's because she's been standing there for about 20 minutes waiting for her side of the queue to move. Whilst everybody else is coming up, you have to then wait until there's a break in the crowd in order to get down again. So as a visitor attraction proposition, which isn't by any means the only way we think about it, but it's not your ideal day out. You get over to the island, you see the castle, you explore it, and it takes you 45 minutes to get off. There are no refreshments, there are no loos, your kids are screaming at you, somebody's fainting. It's a very difficult experience at the time. So this was one of the reasons why we started to explore a project to put a bridge in. So at the same time, when we started the project, English Heritage itself had just been established as a charity. We had just become divorced from Historic England and we were no longer a government department. And as an organisation, we saw that as an opportunity to invest in some really good architecture. We hadn't, as a government department, I think that we hadn't had the freedom to procure our design work in the way that we would want to. And I suppose we hadn't also been bold enough or innovative enough to put the case for contemporary architecture on historic sites. So 2015, we became a charity. We were also given a large dowry. We were given £80 million worth of money to spend on our 420 sites. Isn't actually that much for 420 sites, but it was more than we'd ever had before. So we were able to seriously think about what we wanted to commission and how we wanted to commission it, and whether we could begin to be a good client for decent, good, imaginative, creative architecture. So for me, I was head of projects at that point. The challenge was, how do we get good designers to work with us? Because we have no track record as a client of, with a few honourable exceptions, I think we have no track record of commissioning brilliant architecture. We needed to sort of move the dial and shift the conversation to English Heritage are in the business of commissioning some good work. Will you come and work with us? So we did a number of small projects, some of which are just coming to fruition now. You might have seen in the press recently the work that we've done with Hugh Broughton for his design at Clifford's Tower in York. So there's a fantastic project we would not have commissioned when we were part of the government. We've done other work. There was the Adam Richards project at Walmer Castle, which also got a National RIBA award last year. Other projects, we work with kind of up-and-coming and emerging architects and managed to build a little bit more of a good design reputation for ourselves. But really, the competition for this project was sort of the peak of that work, and it was a commitment from the organisation that we were really going to run a design competition which we hope was done fairly, because we all know about design competitions which are not run very fairly and where architects are not treated very well. We wanted to do it fairly, we wanted to do it transparently, we wanted to do it in a way that would inspire the designers that came and worked with us. And it was an absolute treat on a personal front to work on this, and a privilege. So this was the front of the design package that went out. You can see we ran it with Malcolm Redding Consultants. And basically, this is the proposition that we gave to the designers. We want to get from A to B, red blob to red blob. You tell us how you do it. We can talk to you forever about the site, its significance, its history, its structure. But you tell us, what is the most beautiful and responsive way that you answer this engineering problem. And this is what we gave to William and Laurent at the time. So that's probably nearly sufficient. Very happy to ask questions, and either now or when William spoke to you.
Okay, so I'll see if we can field some questions. I should declare an interest. I'm a commissioner at Historic England. I've got a question for you about that. But I'll save my question because I always like to leave a few moments pregnant silence while I wait for you lot to come up with what you'd like to know. Come on. Thank you very much. It always works.
How many entries were there? How many entries did you have?
I think there was 137 from about 36 different countries. I think that's right. If there's anybody here from Malcolm Redding. And so we worked with them, and we had a jury panel of which Graham Morrison was the chair, and we worked to whittle that down to a short list, and then we invited people to come and see the site and then work with us to, work up some main entries.
And yes?
You said about contemporary architecture in a historical setting. Was that a clear idea that English Heritage had at this stage, or was that something that emerged?
No, it was something we were trying to do across our estate by this stage. But we didn't have, the projects were ongoing, so we didn't have a lot of proof in the pudding at that stage, but it was definitely something we were committing to and already on the road with.
Any more?
Yes, if I may. Are you responsible for understanding the value of architecture? Because that's something.
Goodness me, I hope not.
Because obviously, within your business, it's so difficult sometimes to convince people of the value of architecture.
I think in my former role, so when I was head of projects and I was commissioning projects that included this one, I think you could probably say that I was. But I also serve an executive board and a set of trustees, so I was making the case with colleagues that this is something not only that we would want to do, that actually we had a responsibility to do, in my view, because these sites are of incredible national and international significance, and you have to be commissioning something which is good enough to have a proper dialogue with those sites, and you don't want something which is throwaway. And I talk about visitor centre chic. We all know what a visitor centre typology looks like, and lots of times it's not something that we would want to do.
But I'd say it's a good question, and as English Heritage makes its journey towards a fully fledged, independently financed organisation, the critical thing is visitor numbers, and visitor income. And what this investment is, I think, showing us is that enlightened clients believe that high-quality architecture contributes to the attraction. Can I put my question, which is how were Historic England as an overseer of the heritage asset?
Historic England were
Really awkward.
Game.
Oh,
actually.
Good.
Game, I would say. They had to do all of their due diligence, and they couldn't be seen to cut us any slack, given our former relationship with them. So there was a fine line to be trod there. But we invited them to participate. There was a technical panel who did a sort of first sift of some of the designs, and then there was the grand jury that Graham Morrison chaired. And so we invited them onto the technical panel. One of the things they said to us is, we think your panel is a bit light of archaeologists, so we got Sir Barry Cunliffe to come, which is sort of like getting an ace out of your back pocket on an archaeological discussion. So he came onto the panel, and then we had no trouble, really.
Very good. So you heard it here. Historic England are not always naysayers, they're game. Brilliant. Any more questions from the floor before we move on to William? Oh, one more.
So what was it about this site that, of all the sites that you have under your wing, that inspired you to pour the money in and to develop? What specifically drew you to this?
I suppose, in terms of the business interests of English heritage, it has always been in one of our top 5 sites. And yet it performed so poorly for the visitors that came to see it. And we knew that that challenge was putting people off coming to see it, or they'd come halfway. And so there was that. So without a doubt, there was a business case that went along with this and that said if we could get more people there. And also there's a business case to commissioning fantastic architecture for the very reasons that Ben talked about, that it increases your visitor numbers, but it also increases the diversity of audiences, because more people, if we had done a sort of Game of Thrones replica type bridge here, you know, I'm drawing a picture in your minds, you know, really, that's not going to get you kind of new and diverse audiences. So, you know, there are very good reasons to invest in good architecture.
One more question from a female member of the audience, preferably. We had blokes so far. Oh, Joe.
Well, I have to, we wait and see. We're carrying out master plans at 5 of our big sites at the moment, and then we see what ideas they throw up. So I do have to say that we are, like everybody, a little bit more hard up post-COVID. But we are doing those master plans at the moment, and then we expect them to come forward.
So do the math, work out the visitor numbers on English Heritage's big sites, and that's where to aim your research.
The more you all come and visit, the more money we'll have to invest in the architecture.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent. William.
As Ben correctly said, I really shouldn't be standing here. It should be Laurent Ney and Mathieu Mallier from Ney Partners. You probably don't know much about them, but they are, in my view, some of the leading bridge designers and engineers in the world today. Laurent is not only an engineer, he's also an architect. And I met them about 2 years before this project started, when we'd done a little sketch scheme. I'd set up my own practice in 2013. And we did a sketch scheme for a bridge just on Portland Street here between 2 buildings. And thought, bridges are fun. Let's do some more bridges. Thankfully, most bridges go to competitions. But as most people know, if you do a bridge competition, try to get on the shortlist. If you haven't done 6 already, you're not going to get on the shortlist. So I'd seen Laurent's work and I contacted them. And we actually did a competition in Italy that went nowhere. Laurent quite sensibly said, it's in Italy, you will never win, and we didn't. But then when this competition turned up, within half an hour of it going live, I was on the phone saying, Laurent, we've got to win this one. We've got to do it. And thankfully, we were shortlisted. And I think it was a very good, very well-run competition, completely fair, above board, everything else. I have no complaints about it at all. I don't know who has been to Tintagel. It is a magical place. The whole of the north coast of Cornwall is, in my view, quite a magical place. It's this sort of never-ending cliff and then long beaches. But there is something very powerful about the landscape, and in particular about this funny little rock that sticks out into the sea and is so, in some ways, so poetic. bridges, as the brief is simple, you go from A to B. I need to go from A to B. Often you're doing something quite mundane. You're crossing a road, you're crossing a river, a railway track. And here we weren't even crossing the sea, and we were going to an island, but a tiny little island with nothing on it and nowhere further to go. So it's very, very different, and it always was very different right from the beginning. And that poetic value that I think great architecture has was a key ingredient. I think often you can, if you take the Latin or the Greek, the economics, the politics, the technical aspect of design are important, but ultimately that poetic element, really here we felt there was an ingredient. A quick potted history. For what most of us would call the Dark Ages, they're now rebranded as the Early Middle Ages. This was because they're not quite as dark as they used to be. In the 4th and 5th century, Tintagel was a major trading post between Cornwall, exporting tin and copper and even gold, as far as the Eastern Mediterranean. It's remarkable to think that English Heritage has dug up 5% of the island to date, and so far they've discovered more Eastern Mediterranean pottery on Tintagel than the rest of Europe together from that period. It's also remarkable to think that this funny little island, the population was greater than London at the time. So it was a major trading post. And as we shine a light on those Dark Ages and make them a little bit more Early Middle Ages, we are learning immense amounts of history. So that was in the 4th and 5th centuries. Then, like most of Britain, it was ransacked and off it went. It was ruined a bit. Its next big turn in history was when Geoffrey of Monmouth, in the 12th century, wrote his History of the Kings of England. It wasn't real history. He made up most of it. In particular, King Arthur. Now, some people believe in King Arthur, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm not sure I'm one of them. But if you believe in King Arthur, he was conceived at Tintagel. He wasn't born here, he didn't live there, but he was conceived in Merlin's Cave. Interesting side, Scientologists are very into their Arthurian legends, and you can often see amorous couples heading to Merlin's Cave for it to rub off. And Arthurian legends have stayed with us for over 1,000 years. But Geoffrey Monmouth, his book was a great success. And Richard, Earl of Cornwall, who was the brother of Henry III, he was given Cornwall by his brother, very kind of him. And he decided that what he really needed to do was to get a bit of this Arthurian power and build a castle at Tintagel, which he did. It is unlikely that he had actually ever visited the castle, but a castle was built. And there's no need for a castle in this location. And over time, the castle went into ruin. But here you can see that, as Nichola showed earlier, we have the mainland ward on the left, where there was the drawbridge and a little gap in the middle, B, and then the island ward on the right. And this separation, which is very slight at this time, but this increasing separation between mainland and island is something that really defines the site and actually ultimately defined our project and the necessity for it. By the Victorian times, it was a ruin. But then tourism was happening, and the trains were happening, and people started getting interested in tourism and going to see these sites. This was Turner. It was actually an etching after Turner painting. But it showed that and Tennyson went there and wrote poems. There's this increasing interest, and there's another Victorian layer to this site that was applied on top, while still being a functioning industrial port that was still trading tin and slate from around with the rest of Europe. So we were confronted. That was it. We're on the shortlist. We go down. We meet Nichola, and she explains all of the issues with the site. And as designers, our first question was, help, how on earth are we going to build something here? There's no vehicular access. It's a site of special scientific interest. It's a scheduled ancient monument. It's every single acronym you could possibly think of. It has it. And there we were supposed to build a 65-metre bridge between two crumbling cliff faces. We had it's a long drive down there, 5 hours, and we had a long drive back. And we came up with lots of ideas, which my colleague Florian was noting in the back, and we debated them. I won't go through the debate, but we then started scoring them and being quite analytical about this. A 5-hour car journey with an engineer is often quite analytical. And there's a simple problem. The mainland on the left, 3 meters higher than the island on the right. So just to get my DDA bit in, 60-meter gap, 3 meters. It's already a 1 in 20 slope. And how are we going to link the two? First thing we agreed on is the structure should not be above the deck. We felt that we wanted that idea that you fly at some point. And so the structure, be it an arch, be it a suspension cables, be it whatever it is, it should not be above the deck. That was inappropriate. I have to admit I was slightly smitten by the idea of a stressed ribbon bridge, which is quite a simple bridge. You stretch 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cables between 2 sides, pull like a beast, and lay some deck on top. Unfortunately, Laurent convinced me that the cliffs weren't going to take this. The cliffs were going to fall apart, and above all, we had an issue with the slope from one side to another, and that we couldn't make it. The idea wasn't to be completely DDA compliant, but at least step free from one side. Laurent liked the idea of an arch, and as quite a traditional form in some way. And main issue with something like an arch is that it's only fully functions when it's complete. So you have this temporary state as you're building it, when you need lots of formwork to hold it up. And how on this cliff with the waves, with et cetera, and above all the fact that we couldn't really do any temporary formwork, how are we going to build an arch? And a boring factor about an arch is that when they expand thermally, they generally go up. They have to push up at the top, which meant that we'd have drawn a straight line from one side to another. And I felt that it was very important that actually this should be a fluid walk. When you come down on the mainland ward, you came down onto and hit the island in a smooth curve like that, as opposed to going up in the middle. We had some lengthy arguments about this and how I was fighting physics, and I really shouldn't be fighting physics. But the solution was a cantilever solution, where we would build out from each side, and then we'd have this gap in the middle of the bridge where the 2 halves met. And in some ways, that started to hit this poetic idea of what the bridge should do, and the idea that the bridge is a threshold from one side to another. It also, now cantilever bridges, nothing new. Julius Caesar's favourite type, apparently. The Forth rail bridge is obviously the most famous cantilever bridge in the UK, where you reach out. There they had a little central span, but it's broadly the same principle. And it enabled us to build the bridge in segments. So we could divide the bridge up into 10, 15 segments, install one, and at any stage, if a storm came in, the bridge would be stable, and it didn't need any temporary formwork to hold up. So this was it. This was the solution. In that, when you're doing a competition, you have this sort of 4 or 5 week manic period that we've all been through. And then doing some images. Now this image, I don't know if this one is the competition, but we'd actually prepared our boards, and the day before submitting, we complained to the guy doing the images that we couldn't see the gap in the middle. He said, "There's a gap?" I said, "Yeah, there's a gap." I said, "Wow," but I didn't realize. And 24 hours later, 6 hours before we were due to submit, he provided an image. I thought, damn, we've now got to reorganise all our boards, get it in, and we did. But it helped. There we go, and there we cheated by adding the gap. And this is the design that we. This is the competition entry. So I don't know if anybody from Hayes Davidson here or Phil is here, but they did an amazing job on the images. And I think I'm proud of many aspects of the project, but the similarity between the finished design and the actual images that we produce at the competition is something. We didn't sell a pup, so to speak. We sold the real thing. Again, some of the images done for the competition on the left and right. A little bit of Tennyson happening on the left, I think. But, site plan. The bridge is, as I said, it's inaccessible. There's no vehicular access. It is 65 metres long, 2.5 metres wide. There was very little choice in the location of the abutments, left and right. The nature of the archaeology, the nature of the cliffs, gave us on the right-hand side, on the mainland side, literally 50 millimetres. On the left-hand side, we had about 0.5 metre of tolerance. So there was, that was something we didn't have to decide, which was a relief. In elevation, as said earlier, we divided the bridge up into 15 segments. We'd originally intended it to be a welded construction, but then went for ease of construction, of installation, to a bolted connections at each segment. As a cantilever, this is the bit where my engineer friends are going to catch me out later. Obviously, the top of the cantilever is in tension. So we had a small concrete block, and then the 6 rock anchors drilled into the rock, 16 metres on either side, and they're acting basically always in tension. And then at the bottom, on the lower chord, there's a smaller block, and the wishbones come in with and they were generally always in compression, pushing into the rock. And that's replicated on both sides. We had to do, obviously, all of the trial tests, etc., to make sure it worked, and it does. In section, the underneath, the lower chord is a wishbone, so it tapers down to this single point, and then the deck itself is a variable height, but a constant width. All of the material, it's entirely steel, and it's a mixture between mild steel and duplex stainless steel, which we did for longevity. This bridge is, it's not over-specified, but it is, one of the aims of the brief was it's going to last for at least 150 years. There's no reason why this bridge couldn't last much, much longer. It is effectively if it's maintained, it should last for many centuries. Then, again in section, the bracing between the two elements, Laurent is a big fan of British engineers, and one reference that we both loved was this bridge by Thomas Telford in Scotland. So we referred to the bracing between the upper and lower chords as Telford bracing. And there's a sort of fineness to it that adds that grain and gives it a sort of, I come on to this word, but timeless feel to the actual design. The bridge was assembled or fabricated in Plymouth, so a few kilometres from Cornwall, but as close as we could get. In 2 complete halves, they're built next door to each other, and a full trial erection was done in the factory. Here you can see the tip of the bridge on one side with the mild steel upper and lower chords. The Telford bracing is duplex stainless steel. Duplex is the highest grade of stainless steel you typically use in construction. And it's not completely rust-free, but it's as close as we get. And here's the connection pieces. Again, for a normal bridge, most engineers would agree, you wouldn't normally make these out of duplex stainless steel. You make these out of mild steel, paint them, and then hope for the best. By making them out of duplex, we have to periodically obviously check all of these connections. And if it's mild steel and it's corroding, there's not much you can do about it. You know it's corroding, but you've got to take your bridge apart. Doing it this way, we know it should not corrode in all of these connections. Now that in itself added £500,000 to the construction cost, just doing that. And if there's one thing I would never do again, it's machine duplex stainless steel. It's a silly thing to do, but it was the right thing for this in this particular case. And then this is the actual connection piece in the middle, where the two bridges come together, two cantilevers come together, with a small gap, 40 millimeters, allowing for thermal expansion between the two halves. The deck. Now, one of the disadvantages of putting all the structure below the deck is there's not much on top of the deck to look at. And obviously that experience of walking across was critical. And we proposed slate. I seem to remember some reference from Nichola about kitchen flooring or something. And I know. So we said, well, we could also have this slate here, where we went for 40,000 hand-split Delabole slates, all laid on edge. And again, it wasn't an economical choice, I have to admit. But it's one of the things that everybody, when they walk across the bridge, there's that tactility to it that's beautiful. The balustrade, other than the deck itself, there's a balustrade. And again, how this is, for me, one of these things about architecture, tactility. What is the handrail going to be like to touch? How protective do you feel? You are 50 meters above sea level at this point. And getting a little clin d'oeil, as the French would say, to Arthurian Excalibur swords in the handrail. These were all waterjet cut stainless steel, duplex stainless steel, with a small twist on the top, which gave us this A-frame. So actually from 10 millimeter sections, we created a very rigid handrail, but gave a sense of protection when you're walking across it, but also a sense of transparency when looking from the side. And the duplex, again, it was electro-polished, which makes it very shiny. I was worried it was too shiny, but maybe things can't be too shiny. A little bit of kitsch is always good. The deck. One thing we haven't mentioned is that the site actually belongs to it's part of the Duchy of Cornwall. And Ben Bolgar from the Prince's Foundation was on the jury, a very active member of the jury. And the design, it was sent off for Prince Charles's review. Review is a tricky question because I remember taking a bit of handrail of the previous and a bit of slate deck to Poundbury, and we rang up 2 weeks later to say, so, yes. And it's, oh, do you want it back? Can we keep it? Yeah, of course you can keep it, but that was the feedback we got. So my assumption is he quite liked it. But there's that one comment about, could we introduce a small element of pattern into the deck, which was fine. I thought it was a good point. So within the slates, we took the influence that actually, if one looks at the rock formations around Tintagel, there are these quartz incisions in the rock, and on the typical walls, where they have these slate walls, the image on the right, the quartz is often left on the top, being the most robust material. So within the actual slate pattern on the deck, there is this slight rhythm of quartz incisions leading up to the middle. The installation, going back to the beginning, how on earth are you going to build a bridge here? We looked at helicopters. There are big helicopters in Russia, but they can't allow to fly in the UK, which is a relief. So we looked at a cable crane. Next stop was a cable crane, common in France for building ski lifts and other things. And the idea of a cable crane is you align it on whatever you want to build, and then you can bring in sections and drop it into place. So the bridge cut up into 15 sections, a temporary pylon built by some Frenchmen from Grenoble. And this pylon is all, you can pack it down and carry it up a mountain. Then there's a small mountain here. But then along that line, there's then a cable that's exactly on the alignment of the bridge. And along that line, there's this little thing on the right here, which can pick up 5-ton segments. And so the bridge was chopped up into these 5-ton ton segments, and then brought in. Here's one of the tips coming in. This is accelerated, just wasn't quite as quick. And we'd planned to do these, in theory, one a day. At peak, we were doing 3 sections a day. So the whole bridge went in less than 2 weeks. We'd allowed 3 or 4 months because you just don't know what the weather's going to be like. In the end, and this proves it's a cantilever, just in case somebody doesn't believe it's a cantilever. 2 sections came in. And the actual installation went very smoothly. We were very lucky with the weather, and they did actually all bolt together, which was a relief. Some finished photos of the project, and some drone footage, which was put together. It's a funny contextual and timeless are words that architects often use, and I always slightly shudder at both. I quite like both, but I'm always saying, well, what is contextual? What is timeless? We felt that for this project, obviously the context was so strong. Often building in heritage environments, there's this urge to either mimic, to ape what was built there before, or to overtly or excessively contrast what is there. We've all seen the glass boxes on the side of the old building kind of thing. And that felt wrong here. We liked the idea that the materials that we'd used, steel, slate, oak, were materials that, in theory, were available and people were using in the 14th century, in the 13th century. They didn't have the technology, they didn't have water jet cutting, they didn't have duplex stainless steel. But there was that materiality, there was a resonance between the materiality that we were proposing and the existing. And that, okay, there is a contrast between the lightness of the structure, where we really pushed it into being as fine as possible with these solid cliffs. But that was in this case an appropriate sense of contrast. And how people, some people walk across the middle without noticing, others hang around. There one can see the little quartz incisions. They put all the slates in the wrong way around, but it was a bit too late for that when I told them. And on the opening day, I literally gave PC 15 minutes before the gates were opened, and there was a queue of people in wheelchairs from the village, people who may not have visited the island for 20, 30 years, might have never visited the island, and they were all lined up. There was literally a sort of bun fight as to who was going to be the first over the bridge. Yeah. And the fact that actually the slate deck, the slates have worked loose, and there's this funny crunch when you walk across. Oliver Wainwright likened it to walking on a box of After 8 Mints. And there's the noise and the tactility that you feel under your feet. And that sound was, again, one of those factors that makes it okay, at the end of the day, it's just a bridge. It just goes from one side to another, but it's quite a fun way to go from one side to another. And finishing off with a few more photos, a view I hope none of us will ever get, but it's and that idea of layers of history. This is a site that it has that early Middle Ages, the 4th century. It has the 12th century. It has the Victorians, and we have added another layer, another artifact to this site. Rather like here, the way the mist sort of creates those Chinese layers in the image, and it's our contribution to this amazing location. That's the joint. It does exist. It really is there. People looking down, blissfully aware that they're unaware that they're only on 150 millimeters of steel. Can't leave it out there. And finally, just some quick credits. I think that obviously English Heritage, I was just obviously disappointed to not win the Stirling Prize. It wasn't a big surprise, but I really felt English Heritage should have won the Client of the Year. In some ways, I was more upset about that because they were really exemplary. And you have to have guts to do a project like that. You have to have guts to start. And they had the guts to do it, and the guts to go to a competition, to select a design, not select a fee proposal. And that is beautifully organised by Malcolm Redding Consultants, of course. The courage of the Duchy of Cornwall, because they could easily have said no. Look, why are you doing this? This is a commercial venture for English Heritage. We don't need this. But again, that support that came from Prince Charles, to be honest, and from Ben was great. My colleagues, Ney Partners, Nicholas Pearson Associates, who did the landscape, Ramboll, who did the geotech, Faithful & Gould, QS, and contract administrator. That was a role I didn't want. HR engineers who helped us on site. American Bridge, the contractor, who were all from Yorkshire. But anyway, they're always from Yorkshire. It doesn't matter. And Underhill from Plymouth. And then finally, and certainly not least, the Julian Hans Rousing Trust, who gave a very generous donation, who, not at the beginning of the project, it wasn't contingent on that donation, but their very sizable donation enabled Nichola and her team to do other projects with some of the money that they'd allocated. Voila.
Just an extraordinary, beautiful, and deeply moving, actually, project. So I'm sure you're all similarly touched and raring to go with your questions. Aha, there we go. In the front row and then behind, Beatrice.
Thank you both. It's such a beautiful project. It's sort of the, what would you say? It's a sort of definition of a leap of faith. It's just amazing, I think, as a client is prepared to imagine the sort of context and to lay the ground for something so beautiful. I was wondering whether lots of people now use the old steps just to gaze up at the underside of the bridge, if that's still used, because it's arguably it's more dynamic and beautiful in many ways to see it from below.
So there's a practical response to that, and then a more poetic one, which is what this bridge is all about, actually. The practical one is that when we're busy, we route people back along the under bridge, so there's a kind of one-way system going on. But the more poetic thing is that as a client, we defined that as part of the competition, you had to show us what the underneath was going to look like for the very reason that it was going to be so important. So, and they did it so beautifully, yeah. So.
Is it not technically a viaduct that's slowly becoming a bridge? It goes over land, doesn't it, first?
You can have bridges.
I think
over
you're
land.
overstaying your welcome with this question. So let's have the next question. And is there a hand up for Beatrice to spot following it?
So what's the
We're
most
going up that side, are we? Yeah.
what's the most difficult part during the work, and how did you handle it?
I remember we'd won the competition, and we needed a geotechnical engineer. And I thought, oh, well, let's go local. We'll get a local geotechnical engineer. And I rang a firm in Truro or something like that, and said, okay, we won this project, and da-da-da. He said, oh, I know that project. It'll never work. Right, okay. He said, I've worked on those cliffs, and I've done this, and I've done that. It hasn't a hope. Thinking, okay, well, you're not selling your services here, but you're also panicking me. I'm not saying we rang around 100 engineers and we found one who said it would work, but we then went straight to Ramboll, who had actually done a pre-assessment for. That was a slight heart-in-mouth moment, because if you look at the cliffs and think that in 1,000 years they have crumbled so much, which is a smidgen in geological time, it's not solid stuff. But and then it was a steady project. People weren't being overly ambitious. Nobody's saying we want to open next year. We took our time. We took our time getting planning. So it was okay.
So
Okay.
during the site work, there was no any technically difficulty.
The machining duplex stainless steel. If somebody says it takes 3 weeks, it doesn't. It takes 3 months, and that was a problem because we'd specified it. We wanted this stuff, but it's tough. And going to this factory, seeing what they'd done in 24 hours, you're thinking, you've done about 10 millimeters. But we got around that by having every mill in UK machining stainless steel for us.
Okay, supply chain problems. Any questions? Come on. Any on this side? Joe, you've already had one. So one at the back there by the cameras. Yeah, great.
Thank you very much. John Parker from WSP.
Help.
I have to just tell you, I told one of my colleagues I was coming to this talk, and he said, I went there, I measured the joint, it was 53 millimetres, which tells you something about engineers, I think. But my question is about the slate surfacing and how that's bearing up, because it's laid on edge, and you walk on the edges, and you said it was crunching, and is it wearing well?
It is wearing well. Like most things, it wasn't an entirely original idea. Just on the site, there is, in front of a little hut, there is some slate laid on edge, which I think every architect on the site visit when we went for the competition took a photo of it saying, look at that, it's so beautiful. And in that particular instance, there's earth and there's grass growing up in it. And what's nice about the current bridge is that it's a very good doormat. And the first couple of meters has already got earth in it, and it will have that life. And we know that, okay, I'm cleaning shoes, but you're seeing already this pattern develop. But the actual edges are pretty good. English Heritage had a great idea, if I may say, to encourage people's interest. They could sign a slate. For £5 contribution, I think it was, and somebody would sign a slate and put it in the pack to help raise money. There were so many people who emailed in. It was actually costing them more than £5 to get the slate, sign it, sort it all out. and now people do come along and try and nick a slate every now and then.
I just imagine that's quite hard. Right. Further questions? There's one in the middle here, chap with a green T-shirt. Pass the mic along. Thank you.
I'm really glad you mentioned the sound and the texture of the slate, actually, because when we went down there and admittedly spent very little time on the actual site, just the bridge loop, because it was so impressive. I actually thought the sound was intentional, like as you're walking, and it's semi-transparent, So it did give this little sense of like possibly falling through in a carriage or something. Like it was really nice. But the other thing was the crosses and the handrail and the twist. Was really, I think I assumed it had something to do with the sword. Was there was there any story to like the twist in that little piece? I feel like it was a really delicately kind of evolved thing. I could be imagining that, but
I think water jet cutting is an amazing technique, but there's a certain flatness to everything that's water jet cut. People tend to go for quite a thin material and just cut it out, and it's quite two-dimensional. And we felt that we can have these things, but by giving it that twist, there was it suddenly turned a two-dimensional thing into something more three-dimensional, and it gave that slight sense that somebody could have been doing this by hand. They are actually done by hand, but that in the same way as the medieval iron guys banging away on the metal and twisting these things. That was a little story.
And if I may,
Well-
how much did that cost?
I'm saving that question till the end. Right, and there's one at the back here.
Davud Liaga from Bureau Happold. Given the fact that you said that the bridge is going to be there at least 150 years, and it's quite a corrosive environment with the rock wearing away, and the deck itself using the rock anchors for its support, I guess the question I'm asking, what is the long-term view about the loss of the friction tension in the top deck because of corrosion? I guess
there is an element of adjustment in the deck. So if it's which we used, to be honest, when we installed it to correct the nose. So if there's any sagging over time, that can be corrected. The rock anchors also, there is the ability to make some correction to those. The rock anchors were excessive, should we say? And a part that I didn't talk about, but there's a whole cliff stabilization program that we put in. So there were actually 32 rock anchors put into the cliff to stabilize the cliff. And then the next step is obviously we can start putting in wave protection at the foot of the cliff to prevent the fear is the undercutting of what is a very sheer cliff. We can actually at some point start putting boulders or some kind of reinforcement to prevent that erosion of the cliff itself. Elsewhere, there is an element of adjustment to both the upper and lower abutments.
There's a moment in the time lapse where the land side cantilever appears to jump. Did it, or was that just an artifact of the filming?
No, we were adjusting them as we went.
Okay, so it did jump.
It did jump.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa. Right. Any more questions? We've got time for a couple more. Any more? Yes, from the front.
I want to know when you had your sleepless night. Was it before you presented to the jury? Was it during the build? Or was it ahead of the Sterling Prize jury meeting?
Oh, golly. I sleep quite well, huh? Doing a competition, I think every architect or designer will say this. There's this moment when you see the other entries. You're desperate to see the other entries because you've lived with this thing for 6 weeks, and you think what you've done is the only solution. It's the best solution. There can be nothing else on the planet. And then there are 5 other designs. Think, damn, what did he do? So there's that moment, and then looking at them, thinking, golly, theirs better than ours, and trying to understand. There was a design by Neil McLaughlin, which was a stunning design, but Laurent instantly said, "It doesn't work. Doesn't work." I thought, okay, but there's a jury to convince here, and so I think, yeah, once we had the project, you feel you can control your own destiny, Once you're relying on others, it's much harder.
Okay. Final question to you, Nichola, from me. How much did it cost, and how long will it take to pay back?
Well, I mean, roughly, we've always talked about 5 million quid, haven't we? But, you know, I've slept a bit since then.
3.5 for the bridge.
And the rest of the project, because there's a lot of other project which is about the landscape works and, you know, the triple SI.
And how many visitors and how long to pay that back?
Oh, goodness me, I wish you'd warned me.
I'm sure you do a business plan.
We do. I mean, it will be a sub 10 years return on investment, because we really don't invest in anything that doesn't come in under that. So within 10 years, it will pay itself back.
Fantastic. Okay. That's remarkably quick. 10 years. And so finally, a warm round of applause for both Nichola and William for a wonderful presentation of an amazing project.